Yeah, I was just going to introduce us. Of course, you've been hearing from Kristine, and she is the group leader for the Iowa group. And of course, I'm Beth Rye. If you haven't met me before, I do make myself well known sometimes. And I am with the Michigan Indiana group and work for PTI Engineered Plastics. And we have a few things we're going to present for you today. My side's going to be a little more technical. Kristine's going to talk about Kanban and how to use it in purchasing. And this is a really cool idea. When she started talking about it, I was like, wow, we could really use that here. And I didn't even think about it till she was telling me what her example was around. And I said, oh, we have some things. So think about your business. And when purchasing comes to you and they're like, or even manufacturing, and they say, we've got some stuff that we need to issue, but I really don't want to put it in my BOM because it's not right for that. How do we handle this? And this is a great way to handle it. I don't know how many people are using Kanban in their business. We use Kanban a little bit different. We use it to blend our resins. So if you have a colorant that you're adding, that's how we use it, but we've not used it in purchasing. So I think this is a fabulous idea, and I'm ready to learn more from Kristine. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
All right. Now, since Beth and I are sharing presentation time, this is 10,000 and higher feet level stuff that I'm going to say. So it's going to kind of go fairly quickly. If you've got questions, please make sure to put them in the chat. We'll try to answer them throughout the chat or throughout the presentation, or add them later to Stump to Chump if needed. So I'm going to focus a little bit on purchasing Kanban. You know, like Beth said, I think a lot of you may already use Kanban of some sort in the manufacturing side of your business, but we use it at Ag Leader. We use it in blended areas, but we do strictly purchasing Kanban too, where we're making determination. Oh, there we go. We're basically asking ourselves the question, do we need to use MRP or do we need to use the Kanban? We will never use both because that's almost like a fire and ice situation here. But the thing with an MRP is forecast driven. You know, obviously it requires your part setup, your method of manufacturing. You should have an ECO control, accurate inventory records. Great. MRP is driven by that, and MRP will give you, you know, your job suggestions and your PO suggestions. The Kanban system is trigger driven. You don't have to technically use data in Epicor if you have it as a manual driven Kanban system. You don't use forecast records when it's trigger driven. It strictly goes by your inventory levels, or whatever your trigger is at that point. So I'm going to show you guys just kind of how we do a manual Kanban. This is a Kanban card that we've created for one of our purchase parts. We take this. I'll go through the process of how the Kanban as manual works, but the card, you know, will contain just, you know, a part number, what's the description. Kind of a big thing is, what is your pull rule? What are you going to need to do when you're opening a new box? How do you do it? And then also, you know, who's the buyer? How long of a lead time do we have? A lot of this information is back, you know, to give back to purchasing as they receive the card back. Where's your normal stock location? We put on the stock quantities, you know, how much are we going to buy each time? Again, everything is on the card, so the buyer doesn't have to go into Epicor and do future or, you know, further investigations as to what they need to purchase. When they receive the card, they have all the information they need. They just make their PO and move on with the next card. And again, you know, everything is on there. You don't order material for that part if it's designed to be a Kanban part. Then you just wait for your trigger. Obviously, there are times where you're going to realize that, well, this isn't working. Why am I always out? Why am I not getting my card fast enough? Maybe you need to have multiple cards in the system. You have 2 to 5 cards, depending on how quickly you turn around your parts. And keep in mind, when you do set up, whether that's MRP or you set up Kanban, right? And the biggest thing is you want to make sure you always go back and you reevaluate your settings. None of these programs, are any way of set and forget, because if you do, you're going to be running into issues. And I realize also, especially the way that COVID is treating sourcing of products right now, Kanban may not be a great idea either, because if you're anything like our purchasing department, we're scouring, you name it, everywhere in the world to look for certain components because we have a hard time finding them. So Kanban is great if you do more, if you have more of a, the steady runner, you're going to do 200 of this a week and it really doesn't fluctuate that much. That is one good thing with Kanban. Those are easy to maintain in a Kanban system. If you have more of a fluctuating sort of demand, maybe sitting on MRP and adding a forecast is a better option. So how does a Kanban work? And this actually works whether you do, this is really how it works when you do it in Epicor as well. But Kanban card, what we do is we put the Kanban card on the box, in the tote, or we add it to the rack of the bin location, whichever works. Once the house takes that box or that product and moves it into the manufacturing floor, they pull the card and the card gets dropped at some known common location. We have polls in the warehouse where purchasing will go a couple times a day, pick up their cards, take them back to their desk. They'll go ahead and do all the manual work in Epicor to add the purchase orders. And again, once they're done adding the purchase orders, the cards goes back to the guy in the warehouse. He hangs on to the card for when the material comes in, puts it on the box, and stores it in the inventory locations, and off we go. Epicor doesn't really know anything about what happens when a part is set up as a manual Kanban, and that's okay. But Epicor do also have the option to do what we call electronic Kanban. Again, it's the same thing as event-driven. It's triggered by the on-hand levels that you have in Epicor. So if you look in time phase, if you set this up, you'll also be able to see in time phase, when you go above and below minimum and all that, similar. It's going to use that information to trigger when it needs to auto-create a PO release. One thing we found when we do backflush parts, and we do quite a bit of our backflush parts in our manufacturing area, if there's a difference or a time, between the time the parts is taken from the warehouse and the manufacturing people actually completes that operation to backflush the parts, you could have a little bit of a delay in when that Kanban triggers. That's just something you want to keep in mind, and you want to know that maybe that does include you add another card to the system, or however you end up working that out. How do you set it up? In Epicor, it's pretty easy, actually, to set it up. You go into the sites, to the warehouses tab. You tell it which warehouse you need to put. Which warehouse you're going to look for the inventory. We've set up a couple of different replenishment types. In this case, obviously, it's a purchase replenishment. Your minimum quantity will be the level of when you want to see the trigger started. We have a maximum on some of our parts, only because we have storage limitations. And then the replenishment or the Kanban quantity is the multiples. So in this case, we have 10. Let's say we technically only needed 25 to get to the maximum quantity in a storage location. The Kanban PO will still go for 30 because we've already said it's in a multiples of 10. And then when you go to time phase, you will then see, it says above maximum, for instance. It's not going to stop you to do that. The other thing you'll see is you need to enter is you need to create an open PO in a line, and that's what then gets used to add the PO releases automatically. And I just threw in an example of a purchase order release from the part that I was playing with here. It's nothing, it looks just the same as any other PO release you have, other than the buyer didn't have to go in and set up the PO, set up the purchase, or set up the release. It just kind of happens for you. What also Epicor has is a dashboard. It's called a Kanban warehouse monitor, and that's what we consider the tool that they would use, buyers would use to see what kind of PO releases do I need to handle today. Do I have some that need more attention than others? Obviously, if you don't have any color coding here, you're great. You got 100% fill required. You're good. Got some yellows. That means you have actually a purchase order release ready to be approved and sent off to the supplier. If you got a lot of reds, you don't have enough inventory on hand. You hopefully have supply coming in, or you missed something. So the thing here that's nice with the Kanban monitor, which kind of is going to also lead us into where Beth is going to talk here, is going to be you can set up BPMs and notifications to the buyers when that purchase release is automatically created. Maybe there's an email going to the buyer saying, hey, you need to handle this one. Or you haven't come into this Kanban warehouse monitor. You got too many parts in here. It's going to take them a long time to go through and figure out which one do I need a new release for. That's where the BPMs comes in handy. Maybe you use advanced print routing, and once the PO is created, you send it directly to the vendor. So you got some options there. So anyway, that's for the most part. That's how we. Like I said, I'm very, very 10,000 feet just explaining that there's ways you can do purchasing with your Kanban, where you use Epicor, you don't use Epicor but you don't have to just follow the standard MRP way of creating your PO suggestion. I think that's all I got for that one right now. I mean, I should just say also, we do use, like I said, I mentioned earlier, the Kanbans, we use it in our manufacturing environment too. And a lot of times when we do, we have those set up as non-nettable bins. And so we move the inventory from the warehouse to the floor, because there now are non-nettable bins in the floor. MRP won't consider them. And so, or we won't consider them as part of that inventory when we trigger the next purchase, for the Kanban or for MRP for that matter. And I see there are some questions, if anybody can read them for me, because I'm down to one screen right now. So
sure.
Take my presentation.
I also sent you a question in chat, Kristine. Tracy from Bruno was asking, is anyone auto-populating the buyer on the part? And it was a stump the chump question, but I think it ties in with purchasing better, so I was going to add it to you guys.
If anybody is auto-populating the buyer
on the part record.
Well, I know what we do is, I mean, we have a buyer set up on the product, on the part class, and then we would override the buyer on the part record itself if there needs to be a change to who needs to purchase the part. That way there's less part records or records to maintain for the buyer.
Yeah, and I know we don't auto-populate. We did DMT when we DMT'd our parts in, and we selected the buyer. But our buyers are the ones that set up the parts. So at the time they're setting up the part, they choose themselves as the buyer.
Got it. Well, if we don't have any more questions there, I am going to slide over to Beth so she can do her presentation. She is going to talk about how they use BPMs to communicate, things within their purchasing departments. kind of like I touched on a few of them real quick. So Fred, do you want to switch the presentation over to Beth for me?
Certainly. Just a second. Beth, you should now be the presenter.
Got it.
And we can
All
see
right.
your desktop.
Yeah, you can you see my little pretty tent there? That's not me. I do not tent camp. I just thought it looked nice. And of course, you can see 1,000 icons. All right. So I'm going to talk about, we set up, here at PTI, we have managers who are buyers sometimes for MRO items and things like that, extra things that we need, as well as our buyers themselves are, of course, buyers. But sometimes you need to know when your PO has been approved. It doesn't automatically tell you anywhere that, hey, your PO has been approved. So we said, what can we do? Well, we realized that we could set up a BPM that would go out, and when the PO was approved, it would automatically email, which is a nice thing because you don't have to kind of say, oh, how am I going to find this out? We talked about doing a dashboard, and people didn't like that idea. They were like, I'd rather get an email, and then I can check my emails, and I can send it to a certain email box, that type of thing. So I'm going to say up front, this is use at your own risk. Only test it in a test environment before you put it in live. Do not put it in live first. It may work for us. It might not work for you. Okay, so please use it at your own risk. So we have a BPM here. I have two styles here. So this one was created by one of our consultants, but it's pretty simple, and I've created a lot of these for other things where we have a tendency to rely on our email. I don't know if other people use that a lot or not, but we do here at PTI. We rely on our email, and things come in and we need to respond to our email. We're just triggered that way. So this is a simple BPM where you do your start and you have your conditions set up. Now our condition is, let me see if I can change this. All right, so by the way, this is a data directive. So if you're familiar with doing BPMs, this is done through a data directive, and it's on the PO header table. And we have a condition here that says, if the approval status changes from anything to A, then execute some custom code. And in our custom code, all it does is goes out and gets the PO writer instead of the buyer. Okay, so that's all the custom code does. And then it sends an email to the PO writer telling them, hey, your PO has been approved. So then they can get back with their vendor and say, okay, now my PO is approved, here's the PO, and we can get this item ordered. So those are your simple, we're going to learn more about BPMs in the next presentation, so I don't want to steal too much thunder on that. But the email template in here, if I go back, at the very bottom of that, you see where it says send email here. There's the template. So easy. If you were only sending it to the buyer, you wouldn't even need to do that custom code piece. You could just simply, within this designing the email template, you can see your from and your to. The to is the actual PO writer. That's where that data is coming from, that custom code. If you were just sending it to the buyer, you could go out in your data field of your table and find buyer and put the buyer up in the to field. similar to what we have set up in the subject line where you see the PO in between the brackets. Okay, so that's what that means. So what this does is it sends an email out to the buyer, or actually the PO writer in this case, that says PO, and then it gives the PO number and has been approved. And then your subject is pretty much the same. PO number has been approved. So you could put whatever more information in there that you want. Anything that's out in the table, you can put here in your email template. And that's what the email message looks like. So you can see it's PO 219255 has been approved, sent to the buyer from ERP. So they usually, in their Outlook, they create a folder so that it can go directly in that folder. And then if they see they have mail in there, they can go out there and look for it. It's pretty simple. So it doesn't take a lot of talent or skill set to do this. Pretty easy. So if I go back one, you'll see here's the template. And that's what the email looks like. Pretty easy. When I was working on this, I came across another example for sending an email message, but it's a little more complex. So we use this one. We actually don't use the other one that I ended up putting in. This also is a data directive, and it's the second way of doing it. This is on the PO approved message table, and it's a standard. Flip. Okay. So you start, and there's a condition, and the condition is if the approver response is approved and the approver response is rejected. So it's looking for either to be approved or rejected. Okay. Once it does that, then it's going to execute a whole series of custom code based on the PO header table. And I've included all the custom code. Now I do have to say, I pulled this probably from, I either got it from the EPI users site, or I got it from something I got at Insights one year, somewhere from there. And then I actually put that in. So from those freebie things that Calvin did earlier, this is an example of what you can get. But like I said in the beginning, make sure that when you do this, that you do it in a test environment. Because if you don't do it in a test environment and you break your live environment, I don't think your users are going to be happy with you. So try to make sure you do these things in a test environment. I have put all the custom code in here. There's like 3 slides of it, 4 slides of it, something like that. So you can see all this code. And what this code does is it actually creates the email message. So I'm assuming that this was probably written before we had the new way of doing a BPM where you could pull that little email design in and create it. And you used to have to do it all through custom code. So if you see, this is where it pulls purchasing agent, which is the buyer, and the email address for the buyer. We do that in our custom code to go out and find the, not the buyer, but we actually go out and find the PO writer. So in the previous example, if you wanted buyer's included in the table. So you could just pull that from the table. You wouldn't have to do any custom code. It's pretty easy. So I don't know if there's any questions around that. Let me take a look.
We have a few questions. If you're okay, I'll open it up for questions that we got in through everything.
Yeah, I was gonna actually do my next one, but I can take a couple questions right now. I still have more.
Okay. I think the only one that came in while you were doing it was, how does the approver get notified that they have a PO to review? And I think that's what you kind of showed.
So how does the approver? Yeah, so you can do a similar email BPM that says to the approver, when you just do a change, when you have one come in and it's waiting for approval, you have to find what the trigger is for that. And then you would do an email to the approver that they have one out there to approve.
So Beth, the trigger would be when it goes from no value to pending?
Yes.
And the status goes to pending, that means it's out there for approval.
Right. So you could do that. Let me pop over real quick. I think I have my data directive up here. So yeah, this is the one we were just looking at in the data directive. So you notice that it's a data directive. And we also, when a PO is approved, here's another one we do, we email accounting to let them know. So there's a lot of email things out here that we do. One of the other things, we do a lot of drop ships. So when customers, some of our customers, we buy their resin, but they want it stored just for them. So it's not a community pool of resin. So it's their own for their parts. We do what's called customer purchased, and we do those drop shipped. So what that does is when it's drop shipped to us, but then it triggers accounting to automatically bill for that carton of resin. And then at the same time, emails go out to the buyer, and they'll go to accounting saying, hey, there's something been drop shipped. Make sure it gets invoiced for accounting. And the buyer is make sure that everything was there in the way that you ordered it. So there's a couple of things that happen, and we do that with dropship as well as some emails behind the scenes. So they're pretty email ones. If you haven't written a BPM before, email ones are some of the simplest ones to do or to test out. And they make you look like magic, just gonna say. So those are pretty easy. So that's what this one is. Let me see, this is email buyer. And if I go into my design, you'll actually see it in here. I can blow that up a little bit. So here's our condition that we had from any to all. And then our execute our custom code, which is here with a rule. And we're stringing, even though it says string buyer, it's actually going to go out and look for the writer of the PO. And that's all done within the custom code. And then it sends that information to this email. And I'm looking here. If I click on that, here's where that email template is. Okay. All right. So it's pretty simple to do. If I can do it, you can do it. Any other questions around that?
I don't think so. I think everything else is in general, and we'll hit at the end of everything.
All right. So then the other thing I wanted to show you was this, which I think, where'd it go? It likes to hide. So we had an issue here. Our purchasing department not only creates the POs going out for subcontracting, they kind of manage it. And so there was nothing in one screen that would show us a subcontract part. And they came to us and they came to me and they said, you know, this is really difficult because how do I know how many went out, how many came back, how many were scrapped, and what I've got on hand, and they were just frustrated. So I said, okay, let's start simple. And I created, this is a dashboard, and I created this dashboard simply for subcontract. So what it does, based on either a job number you can put in a part number, you can put in a PO number if you want to look at the entire PO and what the subcontract status is. It will show you here what we sent out to the supplier or to our vendor, and it'll give you a total, and then it tells you what came back in from that supplier. And then its total. Up here gives you a little job information of how many you need to produce and how many were completed on that. Here's the issuing of the material. What did we send? Because we send work in process parts out to them. Well, how many did we send out there? How many were required? How many were issued? And then in our scrap, it tells us how many came back on a DMR. Okay, I must have something open that Epicor is yelling at my BPM. All right, I'm going to close that because I don't want it to beep at me anymore. In our subcontract scrap information, it tells us, and there's even a total down here to tell us how many were scrapped on that. And then it tells us if we have any of those parts in hand right now. And I'm going to show you behind the scenes. You look for the right window. Here's the actual dashboard. And so you can see it's a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different queries in the background, but they're all interlinked somehow. And then based on what my tracker is, it will bring up this information. So it's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I don't know about anybody else, but I think it's pretty cool. And it took me a little while to get to it and get it done right. So that's the little dashboard information. And like I said, I can put in a variety of information and based on, you go back down. I'll show you how this works. So I'll clear that job out. And if I have a different job number, I had one here somewhere. So we send some parts out to get passivated. And that would be a subcontract operation. Simply put in the job number and hit that. Notice we sent out 1,300 pieces today on this PO, and there's the line for the PO and the release. And it also shows our subcontract pack slip. And we're creating this part, which we're then going to use that part. Once it comes back in, once these screws are passivated, they'll come back in. We will use them in one of our parts. Here's the job. How many we need to produce, how many's been completed. This tells the material that we sent out with its job number, how many are required and how many did we issue. We don't have any scrap information because this was just sent out this morning. And then here's what we have in stock. Now you'll see that we do have some on hand in stock, but that was from a previous run. So at least we know we can keep track of, are we running short? What's going on with these parts? So it's kind of a lot of information in the dashboard, but it's easier than if I have to go out to the job, takes just a minute to load, of course. And if I have to go to my tabs here and take a look at information, actually I would go to job details, subcontract, and subcontract transactions. And right now that doesn't look bad. But if you have something like the previous one that I showed, this would be full of different types of transactions. And then you have to either filter and just look for the transactions you want. But what I did was I took basically this screen and I broke it out into this. So shipments are going to show here, receipts are going to show here. There's my job information. Here's my material and what was issued. I don't have to look at this anymore and try to figure that all out. So that was one of our business case uses, and it works very easy. Questions?
There are a handful of questions that people are starting with.
Okay.
Kristine, are you still out there?
Okay, let's start with Tim Shoemaker's got a comment. The hierarchy for buyers is part plant, part class, and then the default buyer for the company. I think that had come up earlier.
Oh, okay.
Kristine, John Myers is asking, are you using Kanban on all parts or only parts not in a BOM?
So for the purchasing parts, we're doing it, obviously those parts do not have a bill of material because they're strictly, the bottom level. I don't know if we have any where we do a BOM. I don't think so.
Okay.
For the purchasing Kanban, at least.
All right. There was one down here that had just come in. Where did it go? From Graham Ross, in respect to the BPM code.
Yeah.
Something he does is he tries to include where he got his code in the comments of the code. So like the URL or wherever he got it from. That
That's probably a really good idea.
Yeah, if somebody comes up with a better method after you got the code, you can also go back and review it, or if you need it somewhere else.
Right. Good idea.
All right, now let's go up to the top of the list here. We had a couple questions emailed in from Carrie Cluting. Is there a way to default the lock quantity box on releases? Their team locks the quantity at 100% of releases on 100% of the orders, and having to go in to manually click takes a lot of time. Is that something you guys are familiar with? If not, I'll push it over to Stump of the Chump.
We use the locks more in our job stuff, and you're referring to purchase orders, I believe.
Yes.
Right, that's on the PO release.
Yeah, and go ahead.
My first thought would be a BPM that would do it for you.
A BPM, a data directive, a screen customization. There's a handful of ways to do that. I don't know of a way to get the system to automatically do it.
Yeah.
So on the release tab, the lock quantity just below.
Right here, this lock quantity.
Yep.
And do you lock dates as well?
It's not mentioned in the question, but possibly.
Yeah, I would suggest you'd probably need a BPM to do that. I don't know any way that you can, there's no magic box or button for that, as far as I know.
Okay. Also from Carrie, we have an issue if a PO or released job is in the system, but is in the past, it wasn't delivered or completed in time. The system doesn't think it will be will be delivered or completed and is generating fake demand, which is skewing demand on the high end for short-term needs. Is there a way to tell the system to recognize that open POs and released jobs, even in the past, are real and not to duplicate them with suggestions?
Well, I know I'm working on the job side of things right now for demand because we have that happen. And I'm looking at root causes. And you really need to watch your dates with your jobs on that. And if you can move your dates out, it does help with that. I would suggest you might want to look at a dashboard for some of that, just to show what's behind, so that you have a good view to say, oh, I've got all this, and I need to take a look at what's driving this. Why is it late? That type of thing. I know people have created dashboards for late POs just so they can go with their supplier. I'm sure right now it's really difficult because, like Kristine was saying, I know even here at PTI, our resins, sometimes we have to scramble to try to find stuff because it's been delayed so much. I'm sure people are running into that issue. But if you throw together a simple dashboard to look at those late things, and you might want to go and adjust your job out to a later time if you can, and that will help clear up some of that, what's going on in the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also from Carrie, is there functionality in Epicor for a requisition system that users outside of purchasing could enter their needs for a good or service that would route for approval and then route to purchasing for automatic release to a PO generation?
Well, there's a requisition system within Epicor itself. And we aren't using it right now, but we're looking at putting that in. I'm not sure, Kristine, if you guys use that requisition system.
No, but we have not.
Yeah, you might want to take a look. I don't know if it's a separate module. I know there's a third-party requisition system for Epicor, and we looked at that. And that would be, I believe it's ARM. That also will do it, but you might want to look at both because they are there. So if you don't have the module, you might want to look at that and just see if it will meet your needs.
The basic requisitions comes with purchase management and is in there. And
right.
The requisition button is available on the MES screen as well. So people out on the shop floor, if they need to buy solvent or shop rags, they can put a requisition in for it that will route automatically to purchasing. When purchasing approves the requisition, they get notified that it was approved and a PO was placed. You can set that email thread up as well.
Okay.
There you go.
Now, to Carrie, just so that you know, I took your items 2 and 3 and put those into the Stump the Chump session because they were more global rather than just purchasing focused. So I'm going to have the chumps try and handle those 2 questions.
All right. For Kristine from Bruce Larson, when Kanban creates a new release, running the standard open PO report with page break by supplier can be emailed to suppliers using APR. So there's a way to get that out there.
Yeah, you can do it that way. I mean, there's a couple of different ways to skin that cat, but that's a good way to do it as well.
Okay. From Scott Williamson, do you use backflushing with subcontract parts or do you issue parts with another method? And I think that came in while Beth was doing her session.
Yeah, we don't backflush simply because we lot track. So backflushing doesn't work really well with lot tracking.
Okay. And Nikki Bitcon, I may need help interpreting this question because I'm not sure if I understand it. Can you explain part number with VS without A at the end?
Oh, that's just our part numbering system.
Okay.
So yeah, what our suffixes are, we may have a part number and it's in red, so it's an A, and if it's blue, it might be a B, and if it's, and then the different levels that were there, like the A whip and things like that, that just tells us where in the process that part is. So like if you saw it as an A whip, it would mean that that's a freshly molded part, but there's something else that gets done to that, whether it's pad printed or it might get laser marked or something like that. So that's kind of our scheme for numbering our parts.
And Mickey also asked, how do you tie those unique part numbers for demand? Or how do you
Well,
tie those part numbers together for demand? I'm sorry.
oh, so in our methods, we call out all those different things as materials. So instead of having a method that has every process in it, because what we do is we might mold parts if they need a secondary operation. We put them in the warehouse until that operation is going to occur. Most of our stuff does not happen one right after the other. Sometimes it does, but rarely does it go from the press directly to the pad print department. It usually goes to inventory. So our methods are designed so that the method to mold it is one job, and then the method to pad print it is another, and it calls that out as a material. In the pad printing method, the molded part is called out. So that's how that kind of works.
Okay. From Scott Williamson, auto receive doesn't work with subcontract operations. Do you use another operation after the subcontract operation?
You mean for receiving?
Yes.
What we do, we have it set up where we have guidelines for our receiving. So everything that comes in the door here at PTI goes through inspection. So that if you notice on our stuff, inspection required is how he's checked, and we do that around the part classes. So what happens here is it comes in the back door from the subcontractor receives it in, then it goes over to receiving inspection, we call it. And they go through, make sure all the documentation's there, because of course we need certifications and all kinds of things. They make sure everything's in a line, and then they receive it. Then it kind of goes back over to the warehouse people, and they receipt it into inventory. So it's all manual right now. I would love to automate it.
Okay.
We just have a few too many things that we have to fix in between.
And from John Myers, how are you keeping MRP from creating PO suggestions?
So I think he's probably referring to the other question where he talked about, you know, if he has parts that are bill of material. This is where you have to this is where you have to really look and make a consideration. Is Kanban even an option? I'm not going to say it's a blanket statement, but I would say if you got bill of materials involved in a part, maybe Kanban isn't the best. Maybe setting it part up as a Kanban isn't the best option for you. Maybe you're better off running it through MRP and get your PO suggestions that way. Because you're really going to have to make a decision whether it's one or the other. You don't really want to use things that are tied to the part as MRP or Kanban. So most of what our Kanbans are the very lower level components. Anything that we have that are sales, you know, more the sales parts, they all go strictly on MRP.
Okay. From Raquel Garcia, I think this is related to you, Beth. When a part is entered, how long does the query take to populate? And you kind of showed that. It comes back in about a second or two, didn't it?
It's like, it's nearly simultaneous. It just, bam. You just have to refresh and it's there. I don't have auto refresh set up on that. I make them manually refresh it right now. But you could always set an auto refresh. But as soon as anything changes, as soon as that transaction hits, it's there.
Okay. And I know we've reached our break time, but if you guys are willing to answer the few other questions here, we'll keep going.
Sure.
From Scott Williamson again, I think on part class you changed the planning fence so the PO change suggestions don't occur. Maybe a low code alternative to using the lot quantity. Oh,
Possible.
maybe not a question so much as a possible answer for the other person. Okay.
Yeah.
Suggestion from Mark Olbrantz, cover how to set up requisitions in Epicor for the next meeting. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, and Tim has an answer. You can turn off suggestions on the part plant tab. So that's another way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you set a part up on Kanban or anything, you know, if you don't want to have that PO suggestion generated, you just turn that flag off.
Yeah.
Or process MRP, you can turn on and off.
Yeah,
Right.
even if you use MRP.
Just actually what Shahan Khan just said was you can uncheck process MRP.
There you go. Yay. It's always good to have purchasing people around. Yay.
Love it.
And from Brad Bowes, you can run manufactured parts as Kanban if the materials are Kanbaned also. So it kind of, like you said, Christine, you have to decide one way or the other. So it's everything's Kanban that you're going through or not.
Yeah.
Okay, and from Joel, I'm probably going to massacre your last name. I'm sorry, Joel Velhofer. You can't backflush material parts linked to subcontract operation. It just doesn't work. Backflushing is specifically, go ahead.
You can also not do it to the last part.
Yeah. Backflushing is specifically applied to labor quantities on standard operations. For subcontract, the material needs to be manually issued or linked to a non-subcontract operation on the job, like pick subcontract operation. And he's using 10.1.600. Not sure if it changed in later versions. You can also look into a customization to automatically issue based on a trigger.
Probably. Yeah. Like I said, we lot track, so backflushing is not an option here.
All right. And just got in from
with lot tracking. I did know that. That's a good thing.
It just got from Tim Shoemaker. For manufactured Kanban, the system will reduce the unfirm jobs that were created by MRP when you complete a Kanban job. This makes MRP and Kanban compatible and allows lower level demands to be driven for Kanban manufactured parts.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not something that we've looked into doing on ours.
Right.
Yep. Another way to skin the cat, like you said.
That's great to know. Yeah, that's great to know. Might be something we can look into.
Well, and I know I'm going to take a look at some of the Kanban stuff because of we do pad printing, and so we have to blend inks, thinners, and hardeners together into a formula, and it just doesn't work well putting it in the BOM. The only thing would be put in there at 0 quantity, so just so we can capture lot numbers that were issued. Other than that, I don't want them issuing actual quantities because of the restrictions around what we need to do. But if we used Kanban in conjunction with that, I think it would work really fabulously. So I'm going to test that out here.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Now's your chance, people.
John Stevens just threw one out, Fred, and that's how do you share forecasts with your suppliers?
Ooh.
Right.
So you run MRP, and MRP creates all these suggestions and demands and future needs. How do you share that with the supplier?
Some gets done via Excel sheets where they take the data and paste it out, copy it out and manipulate it in Excel. We have one supplier that we basically took the information from the PO suggestions and created it into an SSRS report that we then send out to the vendor via email. Obviously, if you have EDI, that's an option, which, you can set up an EDI system and send your forecast information that way. I've done that in the past, but it has not with Epicor, but I know that Epicor has the ability.
Right.
Yeah, otherwise I think our buyers unfortunately do quite a bit of manual work on their forecast to suppliers. If anybody has better ways, we're all ears to help them out on that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, ours do a lot of stuff manually still on that type of thing as well.
All right, and from Ben Dicos, we use auto receipt on subcontract, and it's working just fine.
Oh, well, there you go.
One of the lucky ones.